was there in Seattle. I can't claim any credit for the passage of the resolution. That goes entirely to the community that mobilized behind it and worked hard to get it done. But I was there the entire day of the passage. I was there for about 8 hours. I witnessed what happened. I witnessed the activism related to it. I engaged in activism related to it. So I want to talk a little bit about Seattle, the resolution, my impressions and experiences from that day, and what going forward looks like from my perspective. So Seattle was a defeat. It was a defeat for Modi. And one of the aspects of the Seattle resolution that I think has not gotten a lot of attention is, yes, it was a resolution against CAA and NRC, but it actually, in the second paragraph, opened with language denouncing Modi, specifically denouncing Modi for his role in 2002 Gujarat pogrom, and actually describing him in so many words as the Butcher of Gujarat, which is the first time that I've ever seen that in any resolution, from any legislative body anywhere in America or in the West. So it was a resolution that was a defeat for Modi. It was also it was a defeat for the RSS. And Modi is, of course, as we all know, a product of the RSS. He was groomed by the RSS to take office. And this resolution was just, a defeat for Modi, and then it was a defeat for the RSS. As we know, CAA and NRC are the RSS agenda. They've been put forward by the RSS. They're a key part of the RSS's plan to turn India into a Hindu Rashtra, which is their multi-decade goal. And so I want to talk about how the people that were there at Seattle on the side advocating for the CAA and NRC, the pro-CAA NRC crowd, were mobilized by the RSS, basically. And one anecdote, one example of that really illustrates it, is the presence of a man who was there speaking on behalf of the CAA NRC. This man's name is Michael Brandon Parker. And Michael Parker is an interesting fellow. I've been familiar with him for a couple of years now. He's actually the man that introduced Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard to the RSS. That's confirmed, that's corroborated. It's corroborated by American RSS groups themselves. He's repeatedly traveled to India to work with and to work with the RSS and speak at RSS events. He was actually literally hired by RSS spokesperson Ram Madhav to write a book detailing the RSS narrative about the anti-Christian Kandhamal pogrom in 2008. So he's a hardcore pro-RSS guy. He was there. He was with the pro-CAA. He was speaking on their behalf in favor of the CAA and how it benefits, in their perspective, persecuted minorities from outside of India. So what I surmised from the entirety of the activism of the pro-CAA group is that they were an RSS mobilized group. They were mobilized by the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which works hand in hand with the RSS, HSS. And there was really a very different, there was a real contrast between the pro-CAA group and the anti-CAA group. The pro-CAA group was, it was obviously not organic. It was mostly single adults, few couples, but mostly single adults, all middle-aged or older, and all from a single community, all from the Hindu community, but not just that, obviously all from a specific partisan segment of the Hindu community, versus the other side, the anti-CAA crowd, which was very diverse from a wide range of communities. There were Hindus there, Sikhs, Christians, Muslims, a whole range of people, Dalits. It was a wide range of ages. There were families there, lots of families, lots of young people, teenagers. There were people there with babies and strollers. It was clearly a an organic, naturally occurring group that was turned out. And the other side, of course, of the pro-CAA group, they offered all the same talking points, the same basically RSS talking points that Professor Madan has just referenced. They presented all of these myths that are completely bustable. They ran with this propaganda narrative that's focused on misleading people to view CAA as an active commission. Their arguments, they were all red herring arguments. They were all shifting the dialogue. They were all whataboutery. They were all talking about things that ultimately are actually completely irrelevant to the point at hand, which is that CAA sets a precedent for acquiring Indian citizenship being based on religion. And their arguments were all cloaked in language of peace and love. But if you stepped back and you gave them a moment to just speak and just let them talk, which actually is not what they were allowing the anti-CAA group to do. They were, on multiple occasions, they were shouting down anti-CAA speakers. But if you step back and allow the pro-CAA group to talk, what happened was that, as the idiom goes, they gave themselves enough rope to hang themselves with. They discredited themselves just by their very presence, just by their very verbiage, just by their very narrative. And that really became clear at one point when, after the people were done speaking, one of the city councilors was offering some comments and specifically said in so many words that she was really disturbed by how many of the pro-CAA speakers had offered comments that were tinged in religious intolerance. So, moving on, I want to talk about now that Seattle's done, what next? So Seattle to me was a perfect example of the necessary next step in this ongoing struggle against CAA NRC. We've seen a lot of rallies so far. I've been to several myself. And rallies are fantastic. Rallies need to happen. But Seattle, the resolution that passed there, in my perspective, that was the first real actual action that occurred. Rallies ultimately are unsustainable. They require a huge amount of... Can you hear me?
Go ahead, we can hear.
Yeah, please go ahead. I just muted that person.
Okay. So rallies are great, but they're ultimately unsustainable. Like, they require a huge amount of energy. They boost up adrenaline really high, and then everybody just collapses afterwards. And eventually, at a certain point, they exhaust people. Normal people cannot sustain the energy required to be conducting rallies every single week. That's why Seattle and what happened there is a beautiful thing. Because rallies, a lot of people can't even come to rallies. People have to work. People have to feed their families. And as I've seen at several of these rallies, for instance, I was at the rally on Republic Day in San Francisco, outside of the Indian consulate. It was a fantastic event. There were about 1,000 people there. It was incredible. But one of the downsides is that in that particular instance, there was no actual media coverage of the event. It was mentioned in a couple of diaspora newspapers alongside other rallies that occurred, but there was no local media coverage of it. The San Francisco Chronicle, for instance, didn't cover it. It wasn't, as far as I know, 99% certainty, it was not on local TV news. It was a huge event, but it wasn't actually reported on. And that's one of the downsides of doing these rallies and putting all of that energy into doing them, and then ultimately it's not documented, it's not reported, and local American media doesn't report it. The mainstream American population doesn't even know it happened. So, from my perspective, If you go to a rally and then you go home and then you go to another rally a week later, and then you rinse, wash, rinse, repeat, you might as well have just stayed home in the first place, because the rallies are important, but that's not where the real work gets done. That's not where the rubber meets the road. So, where does the rubber meet the road? What I think the need of the hour is, as many of you are probably already aware, and as Professor Madan has alluded to, is to connect with the American mainstream. And as Mr. Nadeem Khan was talking about, the Modi regime was, in a lot of ways, not really very disturbed by the protests that occurred until these major newspapers in America started picking up and reporting on it. And that got their attention, and that bothered them. And that's what needs to happen, more and more of that. We need to be drawing in America, and I'm speaking as an American citizen. I think most of us involved here today are based in America. For me, for many of us, India is on the other side of the world, and there's a limited amount that we can do there. But in America, what we need to be doing is drawing broader attention to the issue in the American mainstream, and work to produce something that has some impact. So one way is this Seattle resolution. That needs to be replicated. It needs to be replicated across the country. And it needs to be introduced in every city council, everywhere, which various groups are already working on, but which we as individuals can also do our part to work on. We can be going to our local city council. We can be calling up our local city council and asking to set a meeting with the mayor, the vice mayor, or just our city councilor, and going and sitting down with them and bending their ear about how this happened in Seattle. We're interested in seeing this happen in our city. What can be done about it? And then from there, of course, if that produces a bite, if somebody reacts to it, if they take interest, then that can be, if that's done through individual initiative, that can be then passed on to a group that is more capable of carrying the issue forward. But one thing I really want to emphasize is that this, if we do this, as I said, every city council in America needs to be doing this and needs to be approached. And not every city council in America is going to pass an anti-CAA NRC resolution, but that's okay. We need to understand that failure is okay. In fact, we should actually anticipate, expect, and welcome failure, because we may need to try 100 times in order to get one victory. And failure, if we're not failing, then that's a very clear indication that we're not actually trying. And in order to succeed, we are going to have to fail first, or fail at some point. So moving beyond that, we also need to start making inroads into U.S. Congress. And there are, again, already groups that are working on that. But one thing I want to emphasize is that this does not need to be something that's isolated, left to a group. Like, we as individuals should not just be sitting back and expecting that some nebulous group out somewhere out there is going to be doing it on our behalf and doing what we want. As Americans, as people living in the U.S., we have the ability to take action on our own. It's simple enough. It just takes a little bit of time and energy. It doesn't really take any resources at all. It's possible for anyone to attempt to set up a meeting with their congressional representative. All it takes is calling up your congressional representative's office, speaking with a scheduler, telling them you want to meet with your congressman or congresswoman, telling them about what, and then seeing what happens from there. And maybe you get to meet with the congressional representative, or maybe you end up meeting with a staffer for the congressional representative. But something will ultimately usually end up happening. You don't have to be a bigwig. You don't have to be a VIP. You don't even usually have to be a member of any group in order to set up such a meeting. You just have to make the call and request the meeting. And then from there, I really want to point out that the same thing with these rallies. It's the same thing with like if you set up a meeting with the congressional office or any other meeting with the city councilor. You need to document. You need to document, and report that it happened. If I go to a rally and I don't take pictures and do a write-up about it and then send it out and at least post it on Medium, but try to get local media to cover it and pick up the story. Or if I go to my congressional representative's office and I meet with them, but I don't take a picture with them and I don't report that it happened, then it's kind of like it never happened. And there's a lot of positive benefits from reporting on it. One is it just keeps up pressure. It shows that there's action and that there's opposition. It encourages other people who see the news and it motivates them to also take action. If, say, for instance, you're meeting with a congressional representative and you document that you take a picture, you report on it, you put out the news, it puts pressure on that representative so that the meeting you just had with them doesn't get lost. So as I move on and move towards wrapping up, another thing is we need to be doing more of what we're doing right now, which is establishing action networks. And as we do that, the key aspect to success in that, I believe, is to do so as a all community group. Multi-community networking is where the real strength, the real success lies. We need to remember that together, India's minorities are actually a majority. We need to remember that the RSS in America is out there, and they are very active. But what they are is they are a tiny segment of the diaspora. They're a tiny segment of the Hindu diaspora. They are the most vocal and organized, but they are tiny in comparison to the people that are opposed to them. So, lastly, as far as actions to take, one thing I would again really emphasize is, don't be afraid to take individual initiative. There's no central committee to report to. There's no Politburo to report to. This isn't the RSS. There's no top-down approach. This is individual concerned citizens standing up and speaking out. And so one of the best ways I think that people in America can do that is to reach out to their neighbors. Like city council, yes. Congress, yes. Rallies, yes. But hey, have you, as an Indian American, have you gone out and knocked on your neighbor's door? Or, if you already have a relationship, which I hope you do with your neighbor, have you struck up a conversation with them to say, hey, did you know this is going on in India? This is deeply concerning to me. Like, it's so concerning to me that people are even talking about the new Hitler in the East, and fascism rising in India, and all of this. And did you know about it? Because I'll tell you, most Americans have no idea that there are human rights problems in India right now or over the past 20, 30, 40 years. To most Americans, India is still the land of Gandhi, yoga, and Bollywood. And one of the major steps to changing that, I think, is for Indian Americans to go out and strike up these conversations with their non-Indian neighbors. And I know it probably seems a little bit awkward, but it needs to be done. And I also think it needs to really be seriously considered that Americans, your average American, does not know. They're interested. They will be interested, but they do not know. And they won't know until you tell them. So just to wrap up, in conclusion, I would say that as is already happening, as Professor Madan has been doing, as many other people have been doing, as I'm attempting to do, especially in Seattle when the resolution was passed, really needs to be hammered. it's the RSS that is behind all of this CAA, NRC agenda, that's behind the goal of Hindu Rashtra, that's behind the current government in India, that the RSS rules the government in India. And I think that needs to be hammered and hammered and hammered. It's the RSS, it's the RSS, it's the RSS. And don't let up on that. Doing so really communicates, for instance, that CAA and NRC, these laws, the disagreement about them is not just an issue of perception about the legislation or partisanship, fighting between BJP and Congress or something like that. It puts, from my perspective, it puts the RSS, especially the RSS in America, on the defensive. It forces them to come back and say, no, it's not, no, it's something else. It's about persecuted minority. And deny, their denial's a lie, but it forces them to deny, puts them on the defensive. It makes them, even though it's true, it makes them really angry when they're called out about this truth that the RSS is behind this whole agenda. And I personally witnessed that in Seattle. I was live streaming on Twitter throughout the event as I was waiting for hours to get into line for the city council meeting. And there were pro-CAA people that were standing just a couple of people ahead of me. And as I'm filming on live stream and offering a narrative, I'm talking about how this is a BJP RSS backed agenda. And the people in line in front of me, the pro-CAA people, just began to get livid. And they began repeatedly shouting on several occasions, lies, lies, lies. And then one guy actually, on at least 2 occasions, began trying to get onto my camera and calling me an effing ignoramus, and then complaining to one of his companions that, yeah, this moron, like he's just like RSS, BJP, that's all he's talking about. And it was just infuriating people. Because, the truth infuriates these people. So I would say hammer the RSS everywhere you talk about this. Whether it's to Americans, which, hey, it's a great opportunity to educate them both about human rights in India as well as about the RSS. Whether it's to city council, Congress, any of these locations, situations. So lastly, there is a lot of work ahead of us. One unfortunate example is what just happened 2 days ago, which is that the American Consul General in Mumbai just visited the RSS headquarters in Nagpur and literally paid tribute, laid flowers at the feet of the statue of Hedgevar. There's hopefully going to be, I hope he resigns, but there's hopefully going to be some action related to that. And I think that's another great opportunity, actually, for anti-CAA, NRC people in America to rise up and make some noise about that and reach out to their congressional representatives, to the State Department, and say, hey, while this CAA, NRC thing is happening in India, while these new Nuremberg laws are being adopted and implemented in India, with the goal of turning India into a Hindu Rashtra as per the RSS agenda, why is this U.S. consul going and not just meeting with, but literally paying tribute to the founding father, the first chief of the RSS, and express some outrage? So I think that's a good opportunity to be taken. And last thing I'll say is just I would expect going forward, I would recommend that people keep in mind that as the RSS in America, the HSS, the OFBJP, have over the past couple of decades really been particularly working with the Democratic Party. I expect that to switch soon. I think they're going to be starting to court the Republican Party pretty hardcore, especially after the action taken by representatives like Mil Jayapal after Ro Khanna came out and called for rejection of Hindutva. that sort of thing. I saw at the Seattle City Council meeting as the vote was happening in the council chambers, and the pro-CAA group was getting up to leave. I saw people right in front of me just cropping out with comments about how they love Trump. I heard remarks along those lines from a couple more people who were pro-CAA group people waiting in line to speak to get into the city council. And of course, we saw at Howdy Modi in Houston, we saw Modi's and Trump's dance of love around the auditorium there, and we saw Modi basically literally endorse Trump for re-election. So I would say expect that, and as we're working on this in America, as we're working to oppose CAA NRC, which is ultimately working to oppose the agenda of the RSS and the BJP, I would say keep that in mind. So that's what I have to say.